what it means to talk to someone in their native tongue. Of course, you could say like linguistically, but I think there are different ways that people talk now that are subsects of larger digital culture, right? So talk about brain rot, talk about meme culture, and being able to meet people where they're at in a visual and linguistic and stylistic tone does beg some kind of attention from us as far as learnings on how to then translate that into business. Greetings and welcome back to the Kiss My Aesthetic podcast. I have a very maybe hot button topic episode today, but it's something I've been kind of chewing on and milling about for a while, and that's kind of why I wanted to share it. And this is by no means meant to be a political podcast as far as telling you who to vote for or how to vote, although I've always made my choices very clear and my political affiliations very clear. But what I want us to look at as kind of a time capsule moment in history is how both presidential political campaigns have garnered building a personal online brand and meeting their audience on social media and alternate forms of media, podcasts, etc., to get their message across. And I think that this is a great masterclass case study in personal branding. So that's what we're going to get into. Throughout this episode, I really want to break down the different platforms that they're using, how they're using them, how the message is coming across, as well as how business owners might be able to actually learn or gain something from what we've observed from these huge political campaigns. So without further ado, we're going to get into today's a little bit different than usual, very timely episode. First and foremost, I want to explain how the use of design has shifted from traditional posters and flyers to more sophisticated digital assets and social media. This should be a surprise to exactly no one that the times of just having like the social media person in the office are far gone, right? We have on our team at any given time 5 brains working on a social media account because the actual skill sets needed to run successful social media go so beyond the capacity of one individual or one human being, right? So there's still kind of this joke or this misconception that it's like, oh, who let the intern post this? But as you guys know, because you listen to this podcast and you're in marketing yourself, there's a lot of decision making that happens and a lot of quick thinking that needs to happen in order for ideas to stick, especially in an online space. And the sheer number of digital assets is exponentially more than what you used to need to run a political campaign. So gone are the days of just posters and flyers and door-to-door knocking. And now you have every platform, every single different type of media, written, video, photo, digital, podcast, audio, interview at all times. Everything, everywhere, all at once, as they like to say on the Pod Save America podcast. Now, there also is something to be considered here is how we discuss branding elements in all of these places. So color schemes, logos, and typography are strategically chosen to appeal to certain target demographics, of course. But without getting too much into the weeds between the Harris campaign versus the Trump campaign and the visuals of those things, I think what both campaigns have done increasingly well is meet the audience where they're at visually. They are matching or mimicking, they're miming the type of content that those audiences are used to seeing so that there's a feeling of, oh, these people, they speak the same language as me, right? They're talking to me in my native tongue, which is one of the questions that we have in our brand questionnaire. It's actually a question that I think throws people off because what it means to talk to someone in their native tongue, of course, you could say like linguistically, but I think there are different ways that people talk now that are subsects of larger digital culture, right? So talk about brain rot, talk about meme culture, and being able to meet people where they're at in a visual and linguistic and stylistic tone does beg some kind of attention from us as far as learnings on how to then translate that into business. There's data that shows that visually appealing content gets 94% more views on social media, and also that high quality design is perceived as 70% more credible by voters. So these are kind of older statistics, I would say, because we really saw that break down with the Harris campaign over the summer. As soon as she was announced as a candidate, the kind of shit posting style that was happening on TikTok and Instagram of just flooding the feed with content, all of the Brat Summer, Charlie XCX remixes, the coconut tree meme, all of that kind of broke down this need to feel super polished or super distant from the viewer, and instead brought it back down to the tone that people come to expect. I think social media marketing in the 2024 election could be, again, its entirely own episode, its entirely own case study. But really, we're looking at the platforms as well as which platforms are popular with different age groups. If we even roll the clocks back like a decade, 2 decades, people got their information from the news. Like there was pretty much one source of that information. And it was because you watched the nightly news or you read the newspaper or you were going to consistent institutions of sharing information. That is not the case anymore. Increasingly, more and more people are not subscribed to cable. More and more people are on streamings. Less people watch the news. Less people watch the same news. And I think if you have any conversation with anyone that politically differs from you, the hardest part of those conversations is that you're not looking at the same information because people end up in their silos, right? You have the influencers that you follow, you have the podcasts that you listen to, you have the brands that you engage with on social media, and it's less common for you to then engage with content that is not already catered to you, right? This is what's happening with the algorithms on TikTok, on Instagram, etc., Facebook, right? Each of these platforms are popular with different voter age groups. So, because the audience is now not centralized all on 60 Minutes, CNN, etc., and we're really spread out and very split, I think it's really smart that both campaigns have sought out the opportunities to reach those audiences. Also, the rise of TikTok in political marketing, I think I could talk about for forever, because if you go back even a few episodes to the episode with Ashley and Amber, when we were talking about a potential TikTok ban, like that was a very real thing and a very real fear. And then to then see this trepidation and resistance to TikTok take a 180 as the political candidates realize that this is how they can reach a younger demo is so interesting and also frustrating of them not understanding what the app was and then seeing the value in it and then going full bore into that space. I think, again, something kind of crazy. It's worth mentioning that in 2024, TikTok reported a 50% increase in election-related content compared to 2020. So 50%, that is huge. And that's coming from the TikTok Transparency Report. Knowing that, we can obviously see that this is becoming part of the discourse and it's becoming a place to invest time, effort, energy, resources, etc. I read an entire article about the Harris Walls social media team, and I will try to dig it up and put it for you in the show notes, about how with their TikTok posting strategy, they had a small team of less than a dozen people. And when they came up with a TikTok idea, they gave their supervisors 15 minutes to approve it. They had 15 minutes to approve content to go live. Otherwise, it wasn't going to go live. And I think that that's such an interesting way to shore up the distance and shore up the approval process, because it gave that team a chance to really lean on the virality of a sound, of a trend, of something to really kind of get the max reach, the max impact. And it freaking worked. Like the account growth was insane. The amount of engagement, the shares, the follows that were coming from that account during that time were astronomical. I wish I had the exact numbers for you, but I don't. But I think for that demographic that's 18 to 24, they're getting their election information from social media. They're getting it from the people that they follow. They're getting it from the podcasts that they listen to. And I think that that's something that we know is a whole new demographic that's voting for the first time, right? So the rise of TikTok in political marketing, especially among younger voters, is really super unique to this election and very telling about where each candidate sees the future of both parties really going and involvement in politics. Effective campaign design strategies are another thing I wanted to touch on in this like broad overview of how building a personal brand and communicating it through social media comes into play with political campaigns. So some campaigns that have been successful use a lot of striking visuals and clear design to capture attention and communicate key messages, but they're also not afraid to repeat themselves. So for example, if either politician goes onto a podcast or onto a news network interview, they know as they're going into the interview that they need to create a moment that's going to get clipped, right? It's a lot of times that you go on a podcast to then pull out the chunk that's most engaging or most controversial to then get traffic and get eyeballs on your stuff. And I'd be curious to know what statistic of people stop at the end of that clip versus seek out the entire long form version of whatever it was clipped from. But I think because our society has changed so much, our attention span has changed so much, our centralization of information has changed so much, it's really interesting to see that how those clips on their own might be enough to sway someone's opinion, right? So simple, bold slogans are combined with visuals to drive messages. And we saw this happen a lot with the Harris Walls campaign. When she kind of stumbled upon the "we're not going back" as a slogan, as a tagline, it became part of her campaign message. And it's become something that she repeats. Some people say like, oh, well, you're not answering the question or you're just using talking points. And I think her retort within the last week was like, it's called discipline. It's called discipline to say the same thing over and over again because she acknowledges this in her interview as well. She says, people don't get a message until you've repeated it multiple times. It doesn't stick until you've repeated yourself multiple times. And I say this to our clients all the dang time. If you're listening to this podcast regularly, you know this is something I say all the time, right? So it takes an average of 17 touch points for someone to take action on a message. So keeping that in mind, again, the bold slogans, bold visuals, simple, easy to say things, I think is something that we learned from Trump the first time he ran. Build a wall, lock her up. These were really short, snippy, soundbite sentences that simplified, definitely oversimplified, really complex ideas. But for people that aren't plugged into politics and people that aren't tracking the bills and the props and the this and the that and the senators and all the midterm elections, like boiling down the message to a sentence or a phrase is something that people can start to wrap their head around. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, I think is up for debate. I don't love it. I think it makes it too simplified and too boiled down, but effective nonetheless, right? So how you might then put that towards your business is, what is the thing that I can say that can be repeated enough to create intrigue into what it is that I'm really actually trying to do or say, right? Another high-level observation is the role of the consistency for credibility, right? When we show up consistently, people trust us more. I always give the example of how if you're sitting in high school and the kid next to you comes up dressed up every single day looking totally different. One day they're a jock, the next day they're goth, the next day they're super, feminine and flowy, and then the day after that they're really intense or they're really polished. You would kind of get shifty around them because as humans, we like to predict behavior. We like to see patterns and we like to predict behavior. So if you're constantly changing your aesthetic, if you're constantly changing your message, you're constantly changing the way that you speak or the way that you communicate, it makes other people feel uneasy about what it is that you have to say. So the consistency here, especially in branding and especially in building a personal brand, is what's coming into play. Like, think about how Trump presents himself versus how Kamala Harris presents herself, and how she dresses and how she speaks and how she uses certain terminology versus how he dresses and speaks and uses certain terminology. It's a very interesting contrast. And I think that the two have done that on purpose, right? They are trying to stay as far apart from each other as possible in how they're delivering their personality, how they deliver their personal brand, and pros and cons on either side. But it's something to note, especially as you're building your business or building your personal brand, is how you wish to position yourself alongside your quote unquote competitor, right? How do you create space between the two of you, but show up consistently enough that people know what to expect and they know what to get out of you, right? On top of that, short emotional video clips have been definitely appealing to voters' values. This is coming across through TikTok, through Instagram, through Facebook. And what's interesting is seeing how those clips then end up as part of the news cycle, right? It used to be like an alternative to news, and now it is the front line, and then the news is recapping what's happening in those short form video clips. There's definitely a considerable influence of micro-targeting and data-driven design that's happening in both campaigns. And what I want you to think about here is how campaign teams are using that data to design ads or design email campaigns or social media merch, right? To recapture the data that they're of the demographic that they're trying to reach. So micro-targeted ads and broader, more inclusive branding kind of are this dance of two different efforts. But I think we can see this especially in the email campaigns coming out of the Trump group, right? So there's a great TikToker who you've got to search her up on TikTok and find it. I can't remember her handle off the top of my head. We'll include in the show notes if I remember, who has subscribed to the Trump email list. And she shares with screen share, green screen, what the Trump campaign emails look like. And to someone who's in marketing and in aesthetics, they're an absolute assault on your eyeballs. Every single font is different. Every single color is different. The call to actions are obnoxious. The buttons and everything is super loud, super in your face, where it almost looks like spam. And I was having a conversation with someone recently, like either the people designing this are geniuses or they're absolute idiots. But whatever they're doing, it's clearly working for their audience because they don't stop. They keep going. They keep going. They keep going. And they're sending multiple emails a day asking for really feel like wackadoo call to actions. But if they're continuing to do it, they must be getting conversions, right? It must be working. A lot of this engagement is also personalized content that's leading to an 82% higher engagement rate during the election cycle. So think about that in the context of just like reach, right? So consider your email, consider social, consider just general engagement and awareness of politics. 82% increase, according to Social Media Today, is wild. And I think because of this, like, everything everywhere all at once approach, this like kind of be in all the places approach by both candidates, there is a kind of like no way of escaping it, right? But there's a lot of controversy around this kind of personalized political ads, as well as like pervasiveness in the culture of at what point does it like border on propaganda, right? Like at what point does like sharing all of this stuff or being in your silo or getting that very super, super micro targeted ad become nefarious? And I'm not a political expert enough to say one way or the other. So the other bit of this that I think is part of the conversation to the more sinister side is the amount of misinformation around politics and political campaigns. So high quality visuals help promote candidates, but also there is an extreme prevalence of deepfakes, of misinformation, misquoting, things being taken out of context, and used for political gain, right? So I think what I've always admired about politics is the game of it. Like, I'm kind of interested. I loved Game of Thrones. I loved House of Cards. Like, I am entertained. And if I weren't American, I think I'd find it a lot more humorous. But just figuring out how each camp is sharing information and then also dispelling information or poking holes on the other side, right? So it kind of does become this chess game of like, if this person moves this way, how am I then going to move, right? So clear, simple infographics usually help. Clear, easy to read, text, carousels, easy to see videos that don't feel manipulated, but also like there becomes an amount of distrust in that as well. So if things feel too official or too cold or too calculated, and I talk about this with my clients, you create more distance between the viewer and the message. So the reason I think that memes and shit posting and the casualness and like the lack of like polish on some of these posts and emails, for example, I think that gives the audience more of a feeling of this just happened. This was so urgent that it just got posted in the default font, right? It's not all the bells and whistles. It's not sound effects. It's not transitions. It's not fancy camera work, but it's pulling you in a way of like, you won't believe this, or this just happened. Or the Harris Walls campaign, sometimes their captions will be like, he said what? Question mark. Like, it just kind of becomes more of a voice of how you might talk to your audience. And granted, I'm seeing the content that's catered to me. And I want to call that out just off the top. I'm getting served the content that's catered to my demographic and my needs and what I engage with in my algorithm. So there may be, and I know actually, not even maybe, there is definitely an entire sector of content, an entire campaign that is not for me that I have not seen. And I'm just talking from my own personal observations of this campaign, right? And I think that that's something to be acknowledged as well. But getting back to the misinformation bit of it, it's, I think, easy to assume that misinformation only affects people that are ignorant about the source of information. And I don't think that's the case. I'm part of a leadership group here in San Diego. Yesterday, we had a seminar. We actually had two guys from the FBI come in and talk to us about misinformation and cybersecurity, and about how the more advancements that happen with AI is the more we're going to see deepfakes and we're going to see complicated election campaigns, because it's going to be very difficult to differentiate between what's real and what's not real. And I think the only way to get around that is to continue to educate your audience and educate your consumers about what is real and what is not real and how to check it, right? Because we have to know that most people won't check. and they won't double do their research, and they will fall into a rabbit hole of seeing an image and believing it to be real. Even the FBI guy yesterday said, the trick with AI images is just count how many fingers they have, and that will tell you if it's fake or not. And I almost raised my hand and said, that's going to be pretty much a moot point here pretty soon, because the AI images, at least that our team has been working with, are pretty dang convincing. Like, they are pretty right there, right? Like, they got all 10 fingers and toes, like they're fine. Like, and for the unsuspecting eye, for someone who's not trained to look at images the way that we all are, you can understand how someone could be swept up in that. I think the perfect example of this, which was called out so beautifully by Taylor Swift, was how the Trump campaign generated AI images that made it look like she endorsed him as a candidate. And her calling that out and saying that this is an absolutely irresponsible and this is wrong, and saying that this is concerning about AI, that you can do this and people believe it. I think the more that happens, where we're holding people accountable for the misuse of AI generated imagery, the better, right? Because that's going to help combat, or at least create, a seed of doubt. And that's what I took away from the cybersecurity session yesterday, was like, it's not if you're going to fall for a scam, it's when you're going to fall for a scam. And it's not about saying that everyone's out to get you. It's about creating that little seed of doubt. And if someone says, I don't really think that's real, investigate that. And if someone says, I saw this, but I'm not sure if it's real, investigate, like lean into that and help them figure it out, or do your own research, or lean into it with them and say, let's double check that, because I'm not totally sure, right? So all that being noted, we talked a little bit about social media. We talked a little bit about AI. We talked a little bit about building a personal brand, a persona, showing up consistently, repeating your message. These are all lessons that you can actually apply to your business, and I think would be something that is worth noting from this campaign election and putting into practice when it comes to your own brand, right? One of the biggest lessons we can take away from the politics of it all is that authenticity wins, right? Avoiding overly polished content and aiming for a more authentic connection with your audience will always be a higher conversion than putting too much distance between yourself and the community that you're trying to reach. So speaking in their native tongue, posting in the moment, not creating too many barriers for content creation, and being everywhere and everything everywhere all at once is a really good strategy. It's exhausting, it takes a lot of effort, and you're gonna slip up, because that's the name of the game. But the authenticity of trying to do as many things as possible, I think, comes across because you reach different audiences in different ways. Another really great example of this was when Kamala Harris did the Call Her Daddy interview. Granted, I have followed the Harris campaign pretty closely since she's been announced. I also listened to Call Her Daddy. So when I listened to the episode of Kamala Harris on Call Her Daddy, there wasn't much in it that I was surprised by, because I knew both and I fit the demo, right? So there wasn't a ton that she was sharing that I thought was all that crazy or revolutionary. But the more I listened to people recap it, the more I realized that people who aren't consumers of those two things really felt like that was a transformative interview. And she had some zingers, right? She had those sound bites, she had those moments of connection. And what I think was so smart on Alex Cooper's side was keeping the conversation related to what her audience cares about. And she calls it out right from the top. She's like, I am not a person to ask her about fracking, so I'm not going to. I'm not the person to ask her about foreign policy, so I'm not going to. But I'm going to ask her about the issues that my audience cares about. And we're just going to deep dive on this segment of what's at stake in this election and really, really dig in. And I think that was a really smart move. I think that was a really smart way to connect what she wanted to say and what she wanted to learn about this candidate with her audience, right? And another smart thing that she did is offer the same opportunity to Trump. I think as more podcasters and influencers and people that aren't considered traditional news media become major players in political advocacy or political influence, by having politicians on their shows, the more that they can truly be all-inclusive is by inviting everyone to the conversation. And I think it's a shame that Trump didn't take her up on it, because it would have been an interesting conversation. But it just goes to show, if you line up the two side by side of the interviews that they've gone on in the last month leading up to the election, like where they choose to spend the time and who they talk to about what is something to also translate to your business, right? So there is definitely a benefit to, I'm going to go on the podcast, or I'm going to be in the summit, or I'm going to be visible in front of the people that I know my message will resonate with, right? So what's the equivalent in your industry with your business of going on the Call Her Daddy podcast, right? Who's the person that's making waves, that's talking consistently to the right audience, that has the reach, that would give you the platform to talk talk about the things that are relevant to them in the language that they already understand. Then alternatively, what's the outlet you can go to of someone that is an adversary, someone that doesn't agree with you, someone that is going to push you and ask you hard questions, but it gives you the chance to be an expert. And for me, that was Kamala Harris on Fox News, right? So how do you go into an environment where the cards are kind of stacked against you and still stay consistent and still stay on message and still drive home to the people that may be doubtful of what it is that you have to offer and connect with them in a new way? So those are some notes to think about with your own business. You also want to think about how you're balancing this idea of sleek design or consistency with your branding and consistency with your message, your personal brand, when it comes to actual real stories, real testimonials, and real behind the scenes visuals to keep things genuine. So we're always talking about this with our social media clients is there's a time and a place for a beautiful, well-branded, super slick, like high glossy photo shoot, video shoot, branding post. But if you only do that all the time, you lack the opportunity to connect on a real level and get close to your audience in a social kind of way. So thinking about how maybe it's stories or reels or interviews or some opportunity to keep things genuine and kind of bring it to a level that feels approachable is something I would recommend to every business owner out there. Something to think about as you are considering your brand and what you can learn from these political campaigns is that 67% of consumers trust brands when they use authentic behind the scenes content. So seeing how things get pulled together, showing your process, showing your decision-making skills, right? All of these things kind of compound to create a peek into how the sausage gets made. You guys know that I love this because I am a huge proponent of this personally in my business, that every time I'm working on branding, I'm going to be live streaming on TikTok because I use those TikTok live streams as a chance for people to peer in on my process, see how the sausage gets made, and be invested in the outcome. And when people can see or participate or be a process of something coming to fruition, they're way more invested in the outcome of the thing than if you just presented them with outcome. And this is so parallel to what's happening with politics, right? If you can get people on the ground floor engaged, watching the content, sharing it with their friends, knocking door to door, making donations, and you can pull them along with you, when you hit that victory or that celebration, that person feels a part of it. Because they are a part of it, right? They were taken on that journey. They got to see the whole process start to finish, and not even finish, start to apex. And then there's going to be more that happens there, right? There's going to be policies and initiatives and changes that happen. And that's the beauty of our democracy and the beauty of our government, is being able to put someone in power that you feel best represents your ideals, your morals, and your values. The biggest takeaway here also is how to gain trust and reliability by showing up to the audience in the way that they wish to be showed up to, right? So think about this with your business as well. Who are the audiences you're trying to appeal to? How do you reach them? Where are they? How do you reach them in a way that they want to be reached, that they want to be included? And I think all of this wraps up nicely in a bow. Just again, a little brain dump of my thoughts heading into the election, which is so soon by the time that I'm recording this. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you learned anything, or if you want to share resources, have a discussion, please hop over to the Kiss My Aesthetic Facebook group, because in the Facebook group, we can totally bust this open and create some discourse, some back and forth. And what I love most about Kiss My Aesthetic, and especially the Kiss My Aesthetic Facebook group, is everyone comes to the table with respect and dignity for different points of view. There's no cattiness, because if you do that, I will kick you out. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please let me know what you thought. Share it if it resonated with you, and we will catch you next time, and probably with a new president. See ya.